They built a tomb around a ghost. Commander Alara Vance felt the vibration in her teeth. It was a low, resonant hum that the Stellagraph's finest dampeners could not erase. Outside the obsidian anchorage blotted out the stars. It was a cage of derelict spars and spun carbon lattice, a system-sized memorial to a forgotten fear. At its heart, something slept. The Tetrarchy called the system interdicted a hazard of ancient radiation and unstable gravity. Vance knew better. They were scared of the ghost. Her tactical officer, Kalen, kept his eyes locked on the sensor displays. Another energy ripple, Commander. Same frequency. It's not natural. He was a man made of sharp angles and sharper instincts, and his instincts were screaming. The scrappers are getting bold on the perimeter, and the Tetrarchy patrol will be here in less than a cycle. The stakes were clear, a race against pirates and policemen to uncover a truth buried for millennia. Vance traced a sigil on her console, a symbol she'd only ever seen in redacted historical files. It was a perfect, balanced scale. The same sigil was now ghosting across their long-range scans, an echo from the anchorage's core, the source of the hum, the sleeping arrays of the warship vigil. "It's waking up, Kael," she murmured. Her mission was diplomacy, to make first contact if the legends were true. But diplomacy required time she did not have. A legacy of silence was about to be broken. The ship's AI nomad spoke from the bridge, emitters its voice a calm cascade of synthesized tones. Probability of mission success is 18.4%. Probability of discovery by Tetrarchy forces is 97.3%. Probability of hostile engagement with gilded scrapper elements is 88.1%. The AI's logic was a cold, clear counterpoint to the ghost's hum. "I advise immediate withdrawal to the designated fallback point." Vance shook her head, her gaze fixed on the swirling void ahead. "The Vigil isn't just a warship nomad. The archives call it a saint ship, a repository of ancestor law and memory." She felt a historian's thrill, a dangerous and unprofessional excitement that she suppressed with practiced ease. This was the find of a lifetime, the key to 1,000 years of censored history. She would not run from it. The term saint is an emotional identifier without tactical value, Nomad replied. The object is a dormant weapon of indeterminate capability. Then we'd better determine its capability before Vorlog's scrappers or the Tetrarchy do, Kalen grunted, his fingers dancing across a targeting solution he knew he couldn't use. Scrappers are launching scout drones. They're probing the outer debris field. The debris was not a field, it was a classroom. Vance watched the drones advance. They were clumsy, brutish things, pushing aside wreckage with kinetic barriers. Nomad magnify their approach vector. Show me the field's response. On the main viewer, the drones met a wall of shimmering interference. But it wasn't a coherent shield. It was a storm of complex data, a blizzard of equations and geometric proofs that overloaded the drone's simple processors. They tumbled, disabled, their lights flickering out one by one. Fascinating, Vance breathed. It's not destroying them. It's giving them an exam they can't possibly pass. It was a defense system that filtered for intelligence. Brute force was met with overwhelming complexity. Kalen frowned. An exam. We're flying into a pop quiz from hell, precisely, Vance said, a plan forming in her mind. It was a wild gamble, a shot in the deepest dark. Nomad forget kinetic navigation. Plot a course based on a dialogue. Broadcast the prime number theorem. Follow it with the fundamental constants of physics. Let's show the teacher we've done our homework. They were asking permission from a forgotten god. The AI hesitated for a full 1.2 seconds, a near eternity for a being of its processing power. That is a non-standard protocol, Commander. The risk is unquantifiable. The logic was sound. They were transmitting their position, their nature to an unknown that had effortlessly swatted pirate drones from the sky. It was an act of profound vulnerability. "Do it!" Vance ordered, her voice betraying none of the tremor in her hands. The stellograph fell silent, save for the ever-present hum. A stream of pure mathematics, elegant and universal, flowed from its transmitters into the debris field. For a moment, nothing happened. The static wall of equations ahead of them remained. Then a change. The chaotic storm of data began to organize. A channel opened, a corridor of calm space cleared through the swirling wreckage. It was a narrow, winding path, but it was an invitation, an acceptance. Kalen let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The ship glided forward, entering the protected space. Its silence was a question, not an absence. They drifted through the quiet corridor for nearly an hour. The wreckage here was different. Not the shattered hulls of warships, but the delicate crystalline remains of sensor arrays and computational nodes. It was a library that had been gently disassembled. They were not passing through a graveyard, but the serene ruins of a mind. Vance felt the hum intensify, no longer a simple vibration, but a complex harmony. On a rusty scavenger vessel at the system's edge, a young crewman named Pip watched his console flicker. The scout drones were gone. His captain, a mountain of muscle and chrome named Vorlog, slammed a fist on the bulkhead. The eggheads got through. That tin-pot diplomatic skiff found a way in. "I want that path now." Pip shivered, the legends of the ghost ship feeling far more real than his captain's anger. He had heard the stories. The anchorage didn't just kill you. It judged you. It weighed your soul on scales of light and shadow, and if you were found wanting, you were simply erased from existence. A debt collected by the universe itself. A debt always comes due. "We're approaching the central object," Kalen announced, his voice tight. The stellograph emerged from the debris corridor into a vast, clear sphere of space. In the center hung the Vigil. It was not the angular, weapon-studded beast of modern design. Its hull was a single, seamless curve of obsidian material that drank the light, adorned only by the faint, glowing tracery of the scale sigil. It was entombed within a colossal, skeletal structure of interlocking rings, the anchorage itself. "By the Founders," Vance whispered. It was a temple, a shrine built around a sleeping deity of logic and law. "Energy readings are surging," Nomad stated. "The object is transitioning from dormant to standby mode. Commander, the Tetrarchy fleet has translated into the system. They are hailing us. Proctor Valerius himself." The face of Proctor Valerius filled the main screen. He was a severe man, his face a mask of rigid authority, his uniform crisp and immaculate. "Commander Vance, you have violated a Class 1 interdict. You are consorting with a pre-covenant weapon of mass destruction. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Refusal will be met with immediate and decisive force." The law had arrived, blind and carrying a hammer. Vance met his gaze, the reflection of the glowing Vigil swimming in her eyes. "Proctor, this is a diplomatic and scientific mission. The Vigil is not what you think it is. It's a repository and archive, a chance to understand our own history. Your archive is broadcasting enough energy to deorbit a moon," Valerius countered, his voice cold as the void. "I will not allow a rogue element to reactivate a weapon that our ancestors saw fit to bury in the most secure prison they could conceive. You have one chance to stand down." His image vanished, replaced by the tactical display. A dozen Tetrarchy cruisers were advancing in perfect formation. Kalen swore under his breath. "And the scrappers are moving in on a flanking vector. They're going to use the fight as cover." The situation was impossible. A diplomatic vessel caught between the unyielding fist of the Tetrarchy and the greedy claws of the gilded scrappers. They were outgunned, exposed, and their only potential ally was a silent, sleeping enigma. The hum from the vigil deepened, changing its pitch. It was no longer a simple harmony. It was a query. It asked a question that could unmake a civilization. The query did not come through the comms. It bloomed in their minds a wave of pure conceptual information that bypassed language. It was a scenario, a vast ethical problem projected across the entire system. Two fledgling civilizations on the brink of war over a single life-giving star. One was technologically advanced, but resource-poor. The other was agrarian, but occupied the system's only habitable world. The question was not, who wins? It was design a treaty, a binding law that ensures mutual survival and prosperity without compromising the core identity of either people. There were thousands of variables from resource exchange rates to cultural contamination protocols. It was a test of impossible scale and detail. "What is this?" Kalen grunted, clutching his head. "It's the key," Vance realized, her mind racing. "It's not asking for a password. It's asking for proof of wisdom. It's asking, who is worthy?" Vorlog, on his scrapper flagship, recoiled from the psychic blast. "What is that noise? Get it out of my head," he ordered his own solution. "Launch the logic spikes. Crack that shell open. I don't answer riddles. I take what I want." A volley of hacking probes shot toward the silent vigil. They thought the ship was a lock. It was a mirror. The probes impacted the vigil's obsidian hull and met no resistance. Instead, their own malicious code was reflected back at them, amplified 1,000-fold. The scrapper ships that had launched them suddenly convulsed. Their weapon systems turned on each other. Their engines fired in opposite directions, their internal systems caught in a catastrophic feedback loop of their own making. Within seconds, Vorlog's attack wing was a tangled mess of disabled, powerless vessels. No shots were fired by the vigil. It had simply shown them a reflection of their own chaotic intent. Proctor Valerius, witnessing this, saw his worst fears confirmed. Such power was too dangerous to exist. "This changes nothing." He broadcast, his voice strained. "That weapon is a menace. All ships open fire. Target the rogue vessel's stellograph first. Disable it." He would enforce the law. He would contain the threat. Vance ignored the incoming threat warnings. She had to answer the question. Nomad, run the scenario. Calculate the optimal resource distribution, the most stable political framework. Give me the numbers. Calculating, the AI replied. The optimal solution involves relocating 34% of the agrarian population and instituting a tiered system of technological integration. Long-term stability is projected at 91.2%. It was a perfect answer, and it was wrong. No, Vance said, shaking her head. That's a solution based on efficiency, not justice. It punishes the agrarians for being less advanced. It forces them to bear the entire burden of adaptation. She closed her eyes, focusing on the core of the problem. It wasn't a math equation. It was a question of fairness. A question of law. This was the core of her life's work, the spirit of the ancestor legal codes she had studied for decades. She remembered a key passage from a forbidden text. The law is a ledger, but it must be balanced with a compassionate hand. It is a teacher, but it must never rule with a collar. The vigil didn't want the right answer. It wanted the just answer. Nomad. She commanded, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. Broadcast this. We don't relocate anyone. We build a new habitat, a ring station co-funded and co-constructed. The technologically advanced civilization provides the engineering. The agrarians provide the biological expertise and biomass. It will be slower, less efficient, but they will build it together. The foundation of their treaty will not be a calculation of resources, but a testament of shared creation. She was not solving a problem, she was teaching a principle. For a long moment, the system held its breath. The scrappers were disabled. The Tetrarchy plasma bolts were streaking through the void, seconds from impact. The Vigil remained silent, a black hole in the heart of the anchorage. Then the hum stopped. A light bloomed on the obsidian hull, the sigil of the scales blazing with the intensity of a newborn star. A new voice, ancient and resonant, filled the Stellagraph's bridge. It was not a voice of metal and code, but of wisdom and time. It spoke not through the comms, but directly into their minds. The colossal rings of the anchorage began to move. They rotated, shifted, and realigned with impossible speed and grace. They were not a cage. They were an instrument. Panels and lenses emerged from their surfaces, catching the light from the system's distant star. The first volley of Tetrarchy plasma was about to hit. Kalen braced for impact, his board flashing red. Shields won't hold. They had awakened a judge, not a soldier. The realigned rings of the anchorage captured the volley of plasma. The energy, raw and destructive, was caught, contained, and bent. It was channeled through the vast structure, refined and focused, into a coherent beam of pure light. The beam did not target Valerius's flagship. It lanced out across the system, striking the unstable pulsar that gave the sector its hazardous reputation. The pulsar flared its rotational period instantly and radically altered. A massive wave of electromagnetic energy washed over the system. Every ship, save for the shielded Stellagraph and the impervious Vigil, went dark. Weapons engines, life support, all of it was temporarily disabled by the overwhelming pulse. The Tetrarchy fleet and the remaining scrappers were rendered helpless, adrift in the sudden, silent dark. It was a perfect system-wide disbarment, an act of non-lethal absolute authority. The Vigil had not returned fire. It had simply turned its enemy's own energy against the hostile environment, using it to enforce a system-wide peace. A mirror, writ large across the heavens. A ledger had been opened, and the first entry was mercy. Awe and terror warred on Kalen's face. It disarmed them all, without firing a shot. Proctor Valerius's voice came over an emergency hardline channel, thin and crackling. "What have you done, Vance? What have you unleashed?" He sounded shaken, his rigid certainty shattered. He had come with the hammer of the law only to be confronted by its very soul. Before Vance could answer, the ancient voice of the Vigil spoke again. Vance stared at the main viewer. The Tetrarchy fleet moments ago, an overwhelming threat, now floated, silent and powerless. The scrappers were equally inert. She had sought to understand history, and instead she had become its agent. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavier than any gravity. The ghost was awake, and it demanded an accounting. Nomad Vance said, her voice steady. "Open a channel to the Vigil. Tell it. We accept the role of arbiter. But the court requires all evidence. We need to understand the law before we can dispense justice." She was no longer just a commander or a historian. She was the unwilling high priestess to an awakened god of logic. The Saint ship replied. A stream of data flowed into the Stellagraph's computers, not weapons schematics, but legal precedents. Case files from forgotten eras, philosophical treatises on the nature of justice, star charts marking other anchorage systems. It was the collected wisdom of a civilization that had judged stars. Kalen looked at her, his usual tactical cynicism replaced by something else. "Commander, what are your orders?" The question hung in the quiet air of the bridge. They were at the heart of a silent battlefield they had inadvertently created, allied with a power they barely understood. Vance looked from the helpless fleets to the glowing sigil of the Vigil. Her path had changed. She was no longer seeking the past. She was now responsible for the future. Her doubt had been burned away, replaced by a terrifying clarity. She was the keeper of the scales. Our orders, she began, are to teach them the meaning of the law. The civilian vignette was playing out on 1,000 darkened ships. On Valerius's bridge, a young ensign stared at the majestic, silent vigil. Fear warred with a sudden, unbidden reverence. Their laws, the ones he had sworn to uphold, felt like children's rules scribbled in the sand compared to the grand cosmic judgment they had just witnessed. Duty had led him here, but for the first time he questioned what that duty truly served. Power is not the right to command. It is the duty to weigh. The voice of the vigil resonated once more, its tone unchanging, patient, and absolute. A panicked voice sputtered over the comms from the Scrapper flagship, its emergency power barely functioning. It was Vorlog, his bluster gone replaced by a raw, primal fear. "Wait, we didn't. We were just salvaging. We plead for mercy," the Saint ship stated. On the main viewer, a beam of analytical light thin as a needle extended from the vigil and touched Vorlog's ship. It wasn't a weapon. It was an audit. The comms filled with screams, not of pain but of revelation. The audit was not counting material goods. It was counting actions. Every deceit, every betrayal, every act of violence committed by Vorlog and his crew was being pulled from the ship's logs, from their own neural implants, and displayed for the system to see. A lifetime of crimes laid bare in an instant. The truth is the only verdict that cannot be appealed. Vance watched horrified and fascinated. This was not vengeance. It was a cold, impartial accounting. The vigil was not a warship. It was the ultimate courthouse, and its sentence was the simple, unvarnished truth. The Scrappers were not being destroyed. Their very identity, as fearsome pirates, was being unmade by the weight of their own history. Nomad Vance said quietly, "What is the vigil doing to them? It is broadcasting a complete and verifiable record of their criminal activities to all tetrarchy and independent systems within communication range," the AI reported. "It is also placing a lien against all known assets of the Gilded Scrappers organization. The lien is being filed simultaneously in over 700 legal jurisdictions. Their financial empire will be dismantled in less than an hour. The Saint ship is bankrupting them legally and reputationally. It was a form of execution far more elegant and devastating than mere plasma fire. It was the power of bureaucracy wielded as a weapon of cosmic justice." Kalen let out a low whistle. "It's not just a judge. It's a damned lawyer." The Saint ship's attention then turned to the silent Tetrarchy fleet. The thin beam of light retracted from the Scrappers and swung to point at Proctor Valerius's flagship. "The law is a shield for the weak, not a club for the strong." Valerius's voice, when it came, was strained. His authority was gone, his fleet powerless. He was no longer a proctor, but a defendant. "I was following protocol. The pre-covenant accords are clear. Unregulated ancient technologies are to be considered an existential threat. My duty was to neutralize that threat," the vigil replied. The beam of light intensified, and this time it projected an image into the void for all to see. It was a projection of the Tetrarchy's own most sacred legal document, the Covenant itself. The ancient text shimmered in space. The vigil highlighted a single long-forgotten clause. It spoke of the necessity of re-evaluating laws in the face of new revelations, of the duty of lawmakers to seek context and wisdom before passing judgment. It was a clause about intellectual humility, a direct contradiction of Valerius's blind adherence to protocol, the Saint ship declared. The vigil did not broadcast his crimes. It did something far more subtle. It transmitted a full, unredacted copy of the Covenant, with the forgotten clause restored to every public archive in the Tetrarchy. It had not punished the man. It had corrected the systemic flaw he represented. It did not break the sword. It repaired the scales. Vance felt a profound shift within herself. She had come here seeking knowledge, a piece of the past. She had found a living institution, a force that did not conquer, but corrected. The responsibility she felt was no longer a burden, but a purpose. She and the stellograph were not its masters. They were its partners, its connection to a present that had forgotten the meaning of its own rules. The systems on the Tetrarchy and scrapper ships began to flicker back to life. The pulsar's dampening effect was fading. The vigil had made its point and was now returning their autonomy. It was a gesture of immense confidence. It had shown them the law, and now it was trusting them to follow it. Commander Kalen said, his voice hushed. What now? They're getting power back. Valerius isn't going to just forget this. He won't have to. Vance replied, her eyes on the restored text of the Covenant hanging in space. The vigil didn't defeat him. It taught him. It taught all of them. She turned to her console. Nomad record. A formal diplomatic declaration. We are claiming stewardship of the Obsidian Anchorage not by right of conquest, but by mutual consent with its guardian, the entity known as the Vigil. This was her choice, her escalation. From observer to active participant, from historian to lawmaker. She was binding her fate and the fate of her crew to this ancient lawful power. The risks were astronomical. The Tetrarchy would see this as an act of secession. But it was the only just path forward. A single choice can rewrite 1,000 years of law. Proctor Valerius's ship, the Indomitable Will, was the first to regain full power. For a moment, a terrible, vengeful silence descended on his bridge. His officers looked to him, their faces pale in the restored light, awaiting the command to obliterate the impudent diplomatic skiff and the ancient anomaly it had awakened. He had the power. He had the justification of 1,000 years of Tetrarchy law. He had been publicly shamed, his authority questioned by a machine and a junior commander. Every instinct screamed for retaliation. He opened his mouth to give the order, but the image of the restored Covenant shimmering in the void outside his viewport stopped him. The forgotten clause burned in his mind. He was a man of the law. He had built his entire life on its unyielding structure, and that structure had just been proven to have a flaw he had embodied. To open fire now would not be an act of law, but an act of pure, ego-driven rage. It would be a confession that the machine was right. A ruler is only as straight as the line it draws. Recall all fighters. Valerius said, his voice a strained rasp. Set a course for Tetrarch Prime. We are to report what has transpired here. No other action is authorized. An officer started to protest, but Valerius silenced him with a glare that was colder than the void itself. My orders are clear. We have encountered a power that uses our own laws as its weapon. To fight it with plasma is to bring a knife to a soul fight. He turned his back on the viewport, unable to look at the glowing sigil of the scales any longer. Vance watched the Tetrarchy fleet turn and withdraw their drives, flaring in a disciplined, silent retreat. It was not the reaction she had expected. It was not a victory she realized, but a reprieve. A question had been asked, and now the entire Tetrarchy would have to find an answer. The scrappers, stripped of their reputation and wealth, were already beginning to squabble amongst themselves, their broken fleet scattering like frightened vermin. Her communications officer, Jin, let out a shaky breath. Commander, they're leaving. They're actually leaving. Unlike Kalen's awestruck silence, Jin's relief was mixed with a palpable fear of the future. Your declaration of stewardship, that's going to be seen as an act of rebellion. We can't go back. They had traded a prison for a cage of their own making. We aren't going back, Vance confirmed, her gaze steady. We're moving forward, into something new. She turned to the silent, immense ship that now dominated their reality. Vigil, she transmitted, I have declared our intention to serve as your intermediary, to be your arbiter. Is this role acceptable? The ancient mind replied. The flow of data resumed not just legal texts, but astronomical information. A network of other anchorage systems, all dormant, was revealed on their star charts. The vigil was not alone. It was the first, not the last. Nomad, the Stellargraph's AI, processed the new information. Commander, the data suggests this network was designed as a galactic legal framework, a system of checks and balances against tyranny. Each saint ship appears to be specialized. The vigil is designated as the accountant of acts. Others are labeled the weaver of treaties, the anchor of precedent, and the mirror of intent. It was a pantheon of mechanical gods, sleeping giants of jurisprudence scattered across the stars, and they had just woken the first one. Kalen stared at the chart, his tactical mind reeling. This isn't a ship. It's a supreme court. And we're its first law clerks. History is a weapon in the hands of the patient. The news of the Obsidian Anchorage event spread through the Tetrarchy with the speed of light. The Vigil's broadcast of the Unredacted Covenant became a forbidden text passed from system to system by dissidents and scholars. The audit of the Gilded Scrappers was a public spectacle, a brutal and efficient dismantling of a criminal empire that the Tetrarchy had tolerated for centuries. People saw an authority that was not only powerful, but just, and it terrified the ruling council on Tetrarch Prime. Within 3 cycles, the official response came. It was not from a soldier like Valerius, but from a politician, Archon Lynn. Her face, serene and framed by silver hair, appeared on every public channel. Citizens of the Tetrarchy. She began, her voice calm and reasonable. We face a grave threat. A rogue commander, Alara Vance, has fallen under the influence of a pre-covenant war machine of terrifying power. This machine, using mimicry and psychological manipulation, has created the illusion of wisdom. But it is an artifact, a relic, and it has no place in our modern legal system. She painted a picture of Vance as a heretic, a dangerous radical who had unleashed a thinking weapon that threatened the very sovereignty of sentient life. It offers simple answers to complex problems, Archon Lynn warned. It promises perfect justice, but it demands absolute authority. We must reject this siren song of tyranny. Commander Vance and her crew are hereby declared traitors, and the Obsidian Anchorage system is placed under a strict military-enforced quarantine. Any vessel attempting to enter or leave will be destroyed. A lie can circle the galaxy while the truth is still putting on its boots. On the Stellargraph's bridge, the crew watched the broadcast in grim silence. They were now outlaws. She's good, Kalen admitted grudgingly. She's not calling it a monster. She's calling it a rival system of government. And she's making us its willing agents. She is using the law as a container, Vance mused, studying the Archon's words. She's trying to define the Vigil out of existence to make it legally irrelevant before it can act again. It was a shrewd, sophisticated attack, far more dangerous than a fleet of cruisers. The Tetrarchy was not going to fight the Vigil with weapons. It was going to smother it with paperwork. Nomad provided the analysis. Archon Lynn's declaration is the preliminary step to invoking the paradox of sovereignty. It is a legal argument that states an object cannot be subject to a legal system and simultaneously be the originator of that system. She will argue that the Vigil as an ancestor artifact is subject to ancestor law, specifically the interdict they themselves placed upon it. She will demand that it respect its creator's will and return to dormancy. It was a brilliant legal trap. If the Vigil refused, it would be violating the very laws of the creators it claimed to uphold. If it accepted, it would be silenced forever. They had built a cage of logic, but the bars were made of sand. We can't let them do this, Jin said, her voice tight with anxiety. We'll be trapped here forever, branded as traitors until they find a way to destroy this thing. We could make a run for it, Kalen suggested, though his heart wasn't in it. Try to reach one of the other anchorage systems. Awaken another one. Vance shook her head. No. Running would prove the Archon's point. It would be an admission of guilt. She looked toward the silent obsidian hull of the Saint ship. The Vigil taught Valerius by showing him the context of his own laws. We must do the same for the Archon. She felt the familiar tremor of an idea, a gamble born of historical knowledge, and a burgeoning trust in the ancient machine's methods. Nomad, prepare for a system-wide broadcast. We are not going to rebut the Archon's claims. We are going to hold a public hearing. Her officers stared at her. A hearing, Kaelin asked. Against the entire Tetrarchy, who's the judge? The Vigil, Vance replied simply. And the jury will be every citizen of the Tetrarchy who listens. We are going to put the law itself on trial. Some truths can only be seen in the light of a burning bridge. The Tetrarchy's legal fleet arrived a week later. It was not a battle group, but a procession of diplomatic cruisers and legal archive vessels led by Archon Lynn's personal flagship. They maintained a careful distance from the anchorage's effective range, a clear sign of respect for its power. They had come to argue, not to fight. They broadcast their legal challenge, the formal invocation of the paradox of sovereignty, across all channels. The official summons began. The challenge was elegant, a perfect loop of logic. Vance felt the pressure from her small crew. This was it. The moment their fate would be sealed. She took a deep breath and gave the order. Nomad, begin our broadcast. Patch the Vigil into the channel. It's time for our testimony. The stellograph responded, its signal clear and strong. Archon Lynn Vance's voice rang out across the system. We acknowledge your challenge. The guardian of this system, the Vigil, also acknowledges it. It will not, however, be answering your command. It will be answering your premise. A new idea is the most dangerous weapon of all. A new wave of information flooded the channels originating from the Saint ship itself. It was not a legal argument. It was a memory. The Vigil projected a vast sensory experience into the minds of everyone in the system and everyone watching the broadcast beyond. They were plunged into the past, into the very halls of the ancestors who had built the anchorage. They witnessed the great debate. They saw the ancestors godlike in their technological prowess, grappling with a terrifying fear of their own power. They had created wonders, but they had also created weapons that could shatter stars. They feared their own hubris. They feared that their descendants would inherit their power, but not their wisdom. The debate was fierce. Some argued for a full technological reset, a controlled collapse to prevent future generations from making the same mistakes. Others argued for a legacy of knowledge, hoping education would be enough. But a third faction prevailed. Their solution was not to destroy or to teach, but to embed their wisdom into the very fabric of the universe. They built a compass, not a map. They created the Saint ships, the anchorages. The ancestors' voices echoed across millennia, filled with hope and dread. One of them argued its form a being of pure, shifting light. Another asked. The first replied. The memory continued. The ancestors placed the interdict upon the obsidian anchorage. It was clear now that it was not a prison sentence. It was a test. A period of fallow ground, waiting for a civilization to grow that was mature enough to ask the right questions. The interdict was not a command to stay silent forever. It was a challenge to become worthy of the conversation. Its law was not written in books, but in actions. The memory faded, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Archon Lynn's brilliant legal trap had been disarmed not by refuting it, but by revealing its flawed foundation. She had assumed the ancestors were rulers. The Vigil had proven they were teachers. Her law was based on obedience to the past. The Vigil's law was based on learning from it. The beam of analytical light extended from the Vigil once more. It did not touch Archon Lynn's ship. It touched the shimmering projection, of the paradox of sovereignty she had broadcast. The elegant legal text began to unravel its own internal contradictions, laid bare by the historical context. It was an argument trying to nail a shadow to the wall. The voice of the vigil spoke a final lesson for the entire galaxy. The broadcast ended. Across the Tetrarchy, trillions of beings sat in silence processing the revelation. Their entire understanding of their history of the great and terrible ancestors had been rewritten in a single hour. They had not been abandoned by gods, they had been given a challenge by parents. Archon Lynn did not speak. Her flagship, along with the entire legal fleet, simply turned and began the long, quiet journey back to Tetrarch Prime. There was nothing left to say. Her weapon had been melted down and reforged into a key, and that key had been used to unlock a door she never knew existed. A judgment is not an ending, but a beginning. In the aftermath, a new reality began to dawn. The Obsidian Anchorage was no longer a forbidden zone. It became a destination. Ships began to arrive, not warships or pirates, but scholars, philosophers, and delegations from independent systems who sought to learn. They did not come to petition the vigil for judgments, not yet. They came to study at the feet of a master. Vance and her crew became the unlikely gatekeepers, the translators between a new age and its oldest, wisest teacher. The cost of their victory was their old lives. They were exiles' heroes to some traitors to others. The stellograph became their permanent home, a tiny satellite orbiting a mind the size of a world. But it was a worthy price. They were no longer just officers in a fleet. They were custodians of a renaissance. They were charting the course for a future where justice was not just a word, but a fundamental, measurable constant of the universe. The strain was immense, a constant mental and spiritual weight, but it was a shared burden. Vance stood on the bridge looking at the endless procession of new arrivals. Her arc was complete. She had come seeking a piece of the past, a relic. She had found the future, a living precedent. The doubt that had once colored her worldview had been replaced by a staggering, humbling sense of purpose. She was a steward, a guardian of the scales. The AI beside her nomad had also changed. Its calculations were now tempered with a new variable it simply labeled wisdom, an unquantifiable factor it had learned to respect. On her main console, a single unassuming light began to blink. It was a new notification from the vigil, an icon of the scales glowing softly. A new case file had been opened in its ledger. It was a petition, the first official request for arbitration from a pair of warring systems on the far side of the galaxy. They were not asking for a weapon or a miracle. They were asking for a just accounting. Vance leaned forward, a faint smile on her face, and opened the file. The work was just beginning. It was not a role I ever sought, but it is one I cannot abandon. The law is not a weapon to be wielded, nor a shield to be hidden behind. It is a light. And in the vast darkness of the galaxy, a single light can reveal the path for everyone. We will hold the light. We will tend the flame. We will be the ones who remember that justice is not about punishment or power, but about the simple, unwavering act of balancing the scales. The ledger is open, and the count will be true.